Hello everyone, my name is Sylvia Buno, and today I will be discussing Zora Neale Hurston's How It Feels to Be Colored Me. It is a powerful piece that describes Hurston's relationship with her race and how she has maintained her confidence over time. In this presentation, I will discuss Hurston's early life as well as analyze the short story of How It Feels to Be Colored Me. A brief history of Hurston. She was born in 1891 in Notasulga, Alabama. She was raised in Eatonville, Florida, from which she got most of her writing inspiration. She was an anthropologist as well as a writer, as she got her bachelor's degree in anthropology. During Hurston's time, her work was often overlooked and she was underpaid for her efforts. Now, her work inspires others and she is known as one of the most influential writers in history. Hurston's writing style is unique and easy to identify. She has a way of weaving her personality in with her writing. She writes her dialogue in a very unique way. She writes speech in African American dialect. This dialogue is especially prevalent in other works we've read this term, especially the one titled Spunk. This practice used to receive backlash. In context of Hurston's use of dialect in her writing, author Tiffany Ruby Patterson, who wrote about Hurston's career in context of American history, states, "Hurston's sense of place is so vivid and so full of human complication that, paradoxically, it has prevented many readers from entering into her work, precisely because so much rides on how the South is depicted." Patterson is communicating that the dialect Hurston uses in her writing used to create a barrier between the reader and the world she's creating. However, this practice is now celebrated. Dialect and depiction of Southern lifestyles connects her audience to her content. They become immersed in a specific culture, time period, and the characters are given very distinct personality through their dialect alone. In addition, she is known for the controversial opinions and content within her work, which I'll get into later in this presentation. Finally, she draws a lot of inspiration from the town of Eatonville, where she grew up. Many of her characters and stories were taken directly from her upbringing. Getting into How It Feels to Be Colored Me, it is a short story or essay published in 1928. It describes the complex relationship Hurston has with her race. She alternates between feeling as though her identity is erased and she is reduced to a, quote, little colored girl, unquote, and feeling empowered despite other people's perception of her. She notes that she, quote, isn't tragically colored, and she, quote, does not weep at the world. I am too busy sharpening my oyster knife, unquote. This story demonstrates the difficulty that can come with the African American experience, especially as a woman of color. The tone of this piece is overall empowering and positive. Although there are a few moments of vulnerability, Hurston seems to persevere through the difficulties that come with finding her confidence. This is confirmed towards the end of the story where she states, quote, "Sometimes I feel discriminated against, but it does not make me angry. It merely astonishes me. How can anyone deny themselves the pleasure of my company? It's beyond me," unquote. This demonstrates the confidence that Hurston has worked hard to develop and maintain over time. In addition, she seems to present this relationship in a very matter-of-fact way, as though she is making observations rather than telling an elaborate story filled with emotional appeal towards the audience, or a discernible narrative. It seems to also have a bit of an informative tone as well. For me, the most enjoyable part of How It Feels to Be Colored Me is the way Hurston uses imagery and figurative language. For example, when describing her experience dancing to jazz music with her white friend, she describes, "My pulse is throbbing like a war drum." Later, she describes the music. "The great blobs of purple and red emotion have not touched him. He has only heard what I felt." The way Hurston describes atmosphere, sounds, and her surroundings creates a vivid picture in the reader's mind. Hurston uses powerful descriptive language in this piece to connect the reader to the content. Something very notable about this piece is the intentional word choice behind it. For instance, the term colored in this context of the piece seems to depict how others perceive her rather than declaring herself as colored. Hurston begins as her truest self. In her childhood, she's happy and confident and talkative with anyone that passes by her home. It is when she, quote, remembers the very day she became colored, unquote, where the tone begins to shift. She transforms from her most authentic self to the quote, colored person that others perceive her as. This word choice is passive. She doesn't choose this label for herself. She's communicating that this is an obstacle between herself and her identity. It is a product of social training. However, she ends the story on a slightly more uplifting note, stating that she isn't, quote, tragically colored, meaning she doesn't fall victim to social construct. Hurston is making the decision to try and revert to her most authentic self. Deviating from an in-depth analysis of how it feels to be colored me, I wanted to go over the type of content that Hurston likes to promote in her work. She doesn't stray away from inserting her personal opinions or her worldviews in her work, as most writers do. However, an article from The New Yorker describes how her most popular work, Their Eyes Were Watching God, was slammed by critics because, quote, against the tide of racial anger, she wrote about sex and talk and work and music and life's unpoisoned pleasures, suggesting that these things existed even for people of color, even in America. She was judged as superficial. Unquote. This suggests that on occasion, her content can come across as insensitive. In How It Feels to Be Colored Me, she mentions, quote, someone is always at my elbow reminding me that I am the granddaughter of slaves. It fails to register as depression with me. Slavery is 60 years in the past. This shows a potential disconnect that African American readers can have with Hurston. She makes herself vulnerable in her work by stating that she chooses to look forward toward opportunities for improvement and empowerment rather than dwelling on the past. Many of her readers probably disagreed with this mindset, as only their previous generations and the ones before has barely escaped the clutches of slavery. Hurston does not shy away from sharing how she feels in her work, and while it can be observed as brave and socially observant now when we analyze it, it was very controversial during her time. Anyways, I could talk about Zora Neale Hurston for hours. She was a powerful woman who spoke her mind and maintained so much confidence during such a difficult time. I hope you enjoyed listening to my breakdown of How It Feels to Be Colored Me, and thank you for your time. I look forward to seeing all of your guys' presentations as well. Thank you.